Okay, so this is the first time we've ever done this. This is our first ever release webinar. Taylor and I were talking about things that we could do to help existing users understand what comes out when new features come out, and so that's what this is. As you know, there was a major release of Pressbooks last week. It was version 5.6. If you wanted more details about that release, I posted those in the chat on this call. So there's a blog post, and my colleague Liz just added it to the chat as well. So an even fresher version of that link is there in the chat. In the webinar today, what Taylor and I are mainly going to be focusing on are new features that were included in that release. We're imagining that the target audience, most of you, would be network managers or experienced Pressbooks users who have already have some familiarity with Pressbooks and its capabilities. So this isn't really a Pressbooks 101. We're not going to be talking about doing some of the more basic things. We're mainly going to be focusing on new features that have been added to an already existing set of features. And I also wanted to note that much of what we'll be covering today and far more is covered in our large and ever-growing Pressbooks user guide. Taylor does really great work maintaining that, and we'll drop a link into the chat for the guide. So if you have questions about specific things, chances are there's some details and some directions already included in the guide. And if not, let us know and we'll try to make sure that it's added at some future point. We will also try to monitor the chat for questions. So if, as we're presenting, you have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. And our goal is to leave around 15 minutes at the end of the hour for your questions on anything that came up during the session. Anything you'd want to add now, Taylor, before I take
No, I think we're ready to go.
Okay, so Taylor, go ahead. You can take over screen sharing and get us started.
Okay. 1 second, guys. All right, so you should be able to see my my screen in Pressbooks now. Can someone verify that?
I can see it.
Okay, great, thank you. So the big new feature that we were able to make available with this last release was the glossary tool feature, which was made possible by contributions of code from Alex and Brad at BC Campus. So thank you to them. And we launched it on Wednesday with a couple weeks of development work to make it mesh really well with what we already offer on Pressbooks. So I'll go ahead and you can see that on the left sidebar menu here under Organize, there's a new tab called Glossary Terms. I should also preface by saying that I'm doing this demo from the user account of a regular user. So you're not going to see any network manager options on this screen. This is what your users would see and how you would describe to them how to find these. And you would have more options on this menu as a network manager. So let's go to glossary terms. You'll see that I've created a few already. From this page, we can make new glossary terms individually. Click Add New. I'll just make one quickly. So the title, the definition is pretty basic, but we plan on adding additional functionality to this to be able to let users create bold and italics and add links as well, but that is not possible at this time. So over here in the right side, you'll see that there are two options, one for status and visibility and one for glossary type. In the status and visibility menu, you have the option to show or not show a term in a glossary list. So this is something that that keeps the terms that you're creating from going into a big glossary list that you can put at the end of your book that gets created automatically. I'm going to keep this unchecked because I don't want it to be in the glossary list. I'm going to create my term. Okay. The glossary type is something that is going to be a future development. Right now, you can't make different glossary types. You just have the one, but that's something we're building onto in the future. I'm going to go back to the mass glossary term page. So you'll see that the one that I just created is unlisted, which means that it's private. You can see the difference between the listed and unlisted or published in private terms on this page to know which ones are going to be generated when you make a full glossary list. You can also see the options to edit and trash any of those and see which terms have trashed and be able to like reinstate those later. So now I'll go into our chapter. I've taken some public domain text from Pride and Prejudice here. So now you see that there's a new icon on the visual editor called Insert Glossary Term. You can, the way that I just showed you from the glossary page is one way to create these new glossary terms, but you can also create them directly from the chapter that you're working in. So just highlight the term that you want to add a glossary definition to, click the Insert Glossary Term button on the visual toolbar, and then you'll see that it autofills the word that you've put in there. It won't do that if you haven't highlighted a word, and you can just insert a new one, but this just helps speed up the process. So I'll add a definition and click Insert, and it'll add a shortcode there. So you're not going to see the term like pop up in the visual editor. You will only see it once you are actually looking at your exports. So I've added a glossary term for that. And then you may have noticed that I created the word neighborhood earlier. So I'm going to go highlight the word neighborhood, and then I'm going to click Insert Glossary Term. So it automatically brings me to the Choose Existing Term panel because it's recognized that this is a word that I've already created a definition for. So I'm going to leave it on the selected term neighborhood and insert. Oh, bring me back up. Okay, so I've added two new glossary terms, and I'm going to save my chapter. All right, so I can click the word and see the new tooltip. And then I can click it again to close it out. So that's how you create glossary tooltips. What we've seen here, the tooltip that appears, we're adding more styles to them as well, so that the appearance of that is going to change over time. But this is how the tooltips appear for now, and how they can be functional as like an add-on to your web book. To clarify, these tooltips won't work in PDF and EPUB, but they do work in your web book, and they won't be visible in the other export forms. So they fall back gracefully. Nobody's going to know that there was supposed to be a glossary term there, but they will see the glossary list at the end of the book. The glossary list will appear in exports in all formats.
I also
so we'll go on to that next.
Just real quickly, if you go back to that live example, I also wanted to note that you can also see the tooltip even without clicking, just by rolling over. If you notice there's a tooltip that does appear. That is your definition that will appear on rollover. But if you click it, it would appear and stay there visibly on the page until it's clicked again, just as the tooltip behavior for right now. Sorry for interrupting, Taylor. Go ahead.
Well, it's all good. Thanks for catching that. Okay, so I'm going to go back to our organized page now and then navigate down to the back matter. So I want to create a full glossary list, and I want it to happen automatically. And I want it to exclude the ones that I've created as unlisted. So I'm going to name this glossary, and then I'm going to go over to back matter type menu over here on the right side of the screen, and I'm going to scroll down and click glossary as the back matter type. Now you'll see a banner appear at the top that says, to display a list of glossary terms, leave this back matter's content blank. So if you put anything in this field, in the editor field, that would intervene with the glossary list appearing. But if you leave it blank and click create, we'll go to the web book and see that it has created an automatically alphabetized and designed glossary list of all of the terms that I've added to the book, whether through the visual editor or through the glossary page, and excludes the ones that I've said that I don't want to show in the glossary list.
On this particular example, I wanted to note that the thing that makes the magic happen there was Taylor selecting the glossary type from the back matter. The title of that could be anything. The title is not restricted. She didn't have to title that back matter glossary. She could have called the back matter glossary for my book, or book glossary, or list of key terms, or whatever, not a glossary. The magic happened because of the back matter type selected, and you have free ability to choose whatever title you wanted, just to specify.
Yep. Okay, so that is all I wanted to cover with the glossary. I'll go ahead and end my screen sharing and toss it back to Steele.
Great. Taylor, we had a quick question from Jim in the chat. And the question was, is the term unlisted because you did not share it with the main glossary list for the book? Yes, that's what that means. So that unlisted term, you'll note, did not appear in Taylor's glossary list. And if a term—
But unlisted glossary terms still can be used as tooltips. So yeah, they can be used functionally throughout your book the same way, and you can add a tooltip to your book and then go back later and make it unlisted.
So Jim's question was, if a term's unlisted, are there any restrictions on user visibility? And Taylor answered that by saying, no. It can be used in a book. It just won't be generated in that auto list at the end of the book. Thanks for that question, Jim. Okay, so I will jump into the screen share now. And what I want to show you are a couple of things largely related to some book organization and metadata things. Some of you have been the people requesting these, so hopefully you'll feel pleased by seeing these requests in the tool now. The first one is those of you who've been managing contributors, which would be you want to give someone credit for having done something in the book, but you don't want to have to create a user account for them. You can list contributors that used to appear under Organize, but because it's actually metadata that's part of book info, we've moved the contributors link under book info. That's just a location change, but you'll find it there, and we think it's a more sensible place for it to live. I want to show you now in book info. This is would be where you would add the contributors there under author, editor, those various fields. And the create a new contributor thing will take you to that contributor link here. But what I wanted to show is we've added support for DOIs, which stands for Digital Object Identifier. When you publish an article or a book, you can, if you're working with a librarian or you have a service, issue a DOI for that. And that's going to be like a permanent URL reference that helps someone identify the object in question. So we've added support in the book metadata here. So you can add a DOI for a book or for a chapter, or I guess I should say and for a chapter. So there would be an example of where you would enter the DOI in the book's metadata. If I were to save that DOI and then view the book itself, you'll see give me a second here. Okay, in the metadata down at the bottom, there'll be a field that now says Digital Object Identifier DOI, and it will include a live resolvable link to the DOI that you just entered. The same thing is true of a particular chapter in a book. So I have a chapter that I have called Digital Object Identifiers and How to Enter Them in Books, Chapter, and More. It's a very long title. I looked up, so I published an article in a journal a while back. I used this Crossref tool that helps you look up DOIs. Looked up my name. And I said, this is the article that I want to publish. This is this interview I published with the poet. Here's the DOI for that book. And then I could copy that DOI and paste it. There's the DOI right there. I'd come down to the chapter metadata, and I could paste, oops, if I actually had copied it, I would paste it in that field and enter the chapter level DOI metadata there. The other thing that I want to show on this book itself is if we were to go to the home page, we've revamped and changed the table of contents. This is something that I think will help the book itself be more navigable and more intuitive. So as you scroll down in the table of contents, you'll see here's your front matter listed cleanly there. Here's your different types of back matter here. And here are your parts. They can be expanded and contracted. The title of a part, if it's numbered, will have a Roman numeral in front of it, and it will appear on a slightly darker background in bold. The title of a chapter, chapters will be numbered with ordinal numbers, and they'll appear underneath with no bolding on the title and a much fainter background color. You can also collapse and expand all with one click, or collapse and expand individually using those kind of options there. We think that's going to make the book more navigable from the main page, and a similar sets of changes have been made within the book itself when you view the table of contents from the navigation bar up here. So I'll make my screen a little bit bigger, and I'll show you, here's a similar kind of navigation that's appeared there. parts are collapsible and expandable, and chapters appear in kind of a more organized fashion. We think it looks cleaner. We hope that you'll find it easier to navigate books and people will find their way around the book. The other thing that I wanted to show is a feature that a lot of people have been requesting, because we use default terminology for the two-part organization in Pressbooks. When you go to organize, you'll notice that this container element that every book has is called a part. So you can see all the parts and you can add new parts. And the individual chapters inside are called chapters. That's the default name for both of those things. Well, that's the default terminology we use. We understand that different book authors may want to customize the labels that are used for those things inside of a book. So as an example, I'm going to go and show you where we do that. We're going to go to theme options for this book, and we're going to set some different labels for parts and chapters. Instead of having it part, I want to call this, each part in my book, I want to have it labeled as a section. And rather than thinking about a chapter as a chapter in a book, I might think of this as a unit in a class. So now I've given them some new labels, section and unit. The text underneath explains how that label will be used. In this case, it will be used in the table of contents depending on how the theme renders that information. And it will also display in the exports. If you include a part title, it will now say section 1 or section title. And the chapter label.
The part and chapter number theme option above it does need to be clicked in order for the part and chapter label, yes, for that to appear.
Thanks. I didn't specify that, and that's very helpful to specify. I will now save the changes and show you kind of as an example on the book. If we were to look at a particular chapter, like chapter 1, instead of it saying chapter 1, it's now using the label. It's calling it unit 1, which is the label number that I'd want to do. And if I were to export this, you'd see the unit and you'd see section as the labels for chapters and parts respectively. That was what I wanted to demo for that. The other thing that I wanted to show, I guess, were the webbook navigation changes that we made. Short titles, I think I failed on that demo, so maybe I'll demo it correctly next time. Taylor, back to you. You're muted.
I'll unmute myself, and then you can you should be able to see my screen. So I'm going to show you one of the new plugins we've added. So this is a plugin for Markdown, which is a lightweight markup language with plain text formatting syntax. If you've used like GitHub or Slack, you might have run into this. It's a lot of the like hashtags to make things, headings, stuff like that. So if you don't use it, then you don't really need it. But if it's something that you're comfortable with and that's something that you want to be like creating content in, we've added a plugin called Parsedown Party, which was created by our Pressbooks developer, Dak Chartrand, and you can now turn that on the chapter level. So I'll go ahead and activate this plugin, and then I will head over to our chapters, and I've created a chapter called Markdown. So now that I've enabled this, you can see that on the right side of menu status and visibility, there's a new option to enable Markdown. I'm going to enable that. And then you'll see it just automatically gets rid of the regular visual editor and text editor and puts you in this new landscape. So now I can make a heading or put something in italics. Save my chapter, view it, and it works like that. So what we would say about this is that because these are two different kinds of syntax and they're not always going to, like you're creating it in a different language. So we don't, we encourage you not to switch back and forth between the regular visual editor interface and Markdown. If you choose to do something in Markdown, keep that chapter in Markdown. So once you enable the Parsedown Party plugin, all of the chapters are still by default going to be in the regular editor interface, and you can choose whether or not chapter by chapter to enable that. So it won't be globally across the book. So I just
want to say we're expecting that there are some people that just prefer to write in Markdown. if that's you, you know who you are, and this is a feature that you've probably wanted and you've requested, like, hey, I want to be able to write my posts in Markdown. Now it's available. If you're not really sure what Markdown is or whether Markdown's right for you, then probably you might want to just stick with the visual editor. But if you know that you like Markdown and want to write in it, that's basically what we added support for.
Yeah, so that was what I wanted to show you with that, and I'm going to move on to another new feature that we've created. So one thing that we try to accommodate is different people's workflows. So while we encourage people to like draft within Pressbooks, a lot of people also bring in their content from Word. And we wanted to make that easier. So we've added a catalog of shortcodes that you can use to be doing a lot of your formatting in a way that's really compatible with Pressbooks and comes in nice and clean. And we have created these shortcodes to be compatible with that. So I'll go ahead and open up that Word document. If you can see the Word doc that says shortcodes, you'll see that I've added a lot already, and I'll kind of run through a couple of these with you. So there's a shortcode for headings, which would come in as an H1, subheadings, which would come in as an H2, different ones for code, for emails, equations in LaTeX, block quotes, columns, and a few more. And we can add that documentation to this thread, and you can also find it in our user guide, the different shortcodes that are compatible. So I'm going to go to our import tool, select the import type as a Microsoft Word doc, and choose my file. I'll import this as a chapter and click import selection. And you'll go into the visual editor and you'll see that all of these are shortcodes the same way that the glossary insert was a shortcode. And then I will click View Chapter up here, open up a new window so you can see what this looks like when it comes in. So your headings, your H2s, the code, emails, equations, they come in as a LaTeX, the block quotes, footnotes, text boxes, and you can even add anchors. So
I'm supposed to go, whoa, at this point. Like, come on, that's pretty awesome, Taylor.
So yeah, we were excited to create that, and we've got all of the kinds of things that you can do with this available in our documentation. Another thing that I wanted to show you guys is that we have on all of our updated themes, so that would be like Clark, Asimov, Jacobs, McLuhan, and a handful of others, and we can, there's about 8 of those, and we're continually updating those themes and should be able to get the rest of the 20 themes that we have updated in the coming months. So available on all updated themes is that we, now when you make a digital PDF, those links they used to be in the digital PDF, just active links, but you couldn't determine that they were links. So I'll show you an example of that. So this is our user guide. It was exported a couple of months ago, and you'll see that in the table of contents, I can click part and be brought to the part, but you didn't know that that was a link until you clicked it, or something that had to pop up. So it wasn't something innate about the document that showed that. But I'll download this PDF. And you'll see that all of the links that are in this book are blue and they're underlined. So it's obvious that they're links and that you can navigate using them. The last thing I wanted to demonstrate before handing it back over to Steele is that we've added another improvement to our import and export routines by making it so that you can put LaTeX into table press tables, and also that table press tables can now export in your EPUB format. So I'll go ahead and check that our table press plugin is turned on. We're good. Oh, I guess it was over here on the left sidebar. So we'll make a new table. I'm gonna make this really simple. Just one cell. And then I'm going to add some LaTeX here, just a simple equation. I'll save my
While
tape.
Taylor is typing that, I wanted to note that any of you who use LaTeX and Pressbooks know that there's like many different ways to render LaTeX. You can use the shortcode she just used. You can use equation shortcode now. You can use the $sign. You can use the WP Quick LaTeX plugin. Whatever way you want to render LaTeX, they all should work in Pressbooks and in the table cells as long as they're supported LaTeX rendering ways. Just FYI.
So I've copied the shortcode, which appeared in on the table press page for this table that I've created, and I've pasted it into the visual editor for my table press chapter. So now I'm going to save my changes. And we can see that the equation translates into LaTeX in our book here, inside of the table press table. So now I'll go over to export, and I'll show you how table press now appears in our EPUBs. Just a sec. Download that file. Go to my table press chapter, and my table has appeared. So you'll notice that in the webbook, those table press tables can be, users can go through to sort the cells in different ways. Well, that can't be done in an ebook. Table press tables didn't used to be able to support LaTeX at all, and table press tables couldn't be seen in ebooks at all. So both of those are improvements for how those have been integrated into Pressbooks. All right, so I'll stop sharing my screen and go back to Steele now.
Taylor, while you were presenting, we had a couple of questions from Fortress Press. They were asking, do the shortcodes work on PDF exports? And I said, yes, they do export. And then they said, great, PDF for print too. And so I wanted you to speak to that. But tell us a little bit about how the shortcodes work in the export world and what happens there.
So it's going to be the functionality of the tool and not, and like the property of whatever you're making, and not necessarily the shortcode itself that determines whether or not it can be used in those different formats. So a glossary tooltip is technically a shortcode, but that's not going to come through in your print documents. But most of your default shortcodes that you're taking from a Word document and turning into a PDF, they are going to work. So block quotes, yes. Headings, yes.
Great. The other thing that was, I think, maybe related is you were talking about the links appearing as hyperlinks in the PDF exports. That's referring to the PDF digital export format, correct? And in the PDF print, they're not going to be marked because they're not actionable as links in the same way.
Right, so those links are only going to be evident in the digital PDF. And so if you're distributing that digital PDF to people so they know that they can navigate through it, the print PDF is still meant to be printed out, and those links aren't meant to be accessed that way. So it's the links will appear as plain text.
Thanks, Taylor. I hope that answered the question there from Fortress. If you have follow-ups, you feel free to put them in the chat. I'm going to go back to sharing my screen here, and I want to show you a couple of other cool things. One is that Pressbooks maintains a whitelist of iframe content that we allow people to embed in the books, which means that you can take party from third content sites that's published there and drop it in an iframe, and we allow it to be displayed because we trust the source. One of the cool tools that can be made as an iframe is called Timeline.js. It's made by the Knight Lab. It's a journalism outfit out of Northwestern University, and they let you build these really interesting interactive timelines. I built several of them actually for my dissertation, where I was helping people understand objectivist poets. And so in this example, I'm going to take the code for a timeline that I built about the life of the poet Lorraine Niedecker. I've generated the iframe using their tool, and I'm going to take the iframe, I'm going to switch into the text view here, I'm going to paste the iframe, I'm going to come back to the visual view, I'm going to save my chapter. And now when I view it on the web, you'll see I have this really cool looking timeline, a Knight timeline that's been embedded in my Pressbook that's fully interactive. So I can view the first entry here. I can jump forward in time, see this entry. I could jump to this entry where she meets Louis Zukowski. I can jump to this book. I mean, it's a fully featured night timeline that's now embedded in a Pressbook. So we support the timeline JS embeds via the iframe method now. Another really cool thing that we like to do is use annotation via the tool Hypothesis. And so what I want to show you now is what we've done to change how the content resizes dynamically when the annotation layer is embedded. You'll notice that I turned on the annotation so that it's visible, and you see here there's a number 1 in the margin and a yellow piece of text that's highlighted. When my annotation is turned on, I can click on that highlight and the annotation pane expands, and you'll notice that my text just resized. Previously, when an annotation expanded, it would just sit on top of whatever text you had. I can resize this annotation, and my Pressbooks content will resize adaptively up to a certain point. If I try to make the annotation really big, it doesn't obviously make my page really, really small, but you'll notice that the whole page resizes so that you can still see the next button, and you can still see all the stuff that's in the navigation bar at the top. That resizing feature is one that we're really pleased with. So now the content and the annotation don't compete with each other, but seem more complementary. We've known that there's a small bug on that we're looking at and addressing. It'll be out in a future release. So if you experience some wonkiness, be patient and let us know what you're experiencing. The other thing that I wanted to show, I guess related to this, are some changes that we've made to our WYSIWYG editor and the HTML output. So the first thing we did was, if, for example, you're teaching a computer science course or you want to have a code demonstration in your book, there is an HTML element called code that's used to wrap examples of code so that they display not as the HTML renderer would display them, but as a block that's like non-transformed code. So in this case, I grabbed from a website that teaches you how to do sample JavaScript. Here's a code example. I'm going to come back in my Pressbooks book and paste it. Now, I want to specify that this is code, so I'll select this whole piece, and I can use this little code button from the WYSIWYG to turn that into code. Now, and I can even remove the extra spaces if I don't want them. I can clean that up. You'll notice that visually it looks a little bit different. It looks kind of more, what is it called, monotypy for the typeface. That means it's wrapped in a code element. Or I could simply type new code that would be like body, and then click the little code element and turn it into code. If I were to preview that, you'll see this is being rendered as code in the output. And if you were to look under the hood, you'd see this is all wrapped in a code HTML wrapper, which is what we want to have happen. So it's easier to use examples of code if you're teaching computer code or some other kind of coding thing. You can specify in a clean semantic way that that's code. The other thing that we wanted to do is to improve the output of media when you use the built-in WordPress media insertion tools. In HTML, what I'm going to do now is insert an app image with a caption right here. So I'm going to use the Add Media tool. What I did was I went to a free website called Unsplash that makes these images available. I found this cactus image that I really liked, and I downloaded that image. Oh, where's my down? There's somewhere there's a download button, so pretend like I downloaded it. Download free. Okay, I downloaded the image. This is the author, or who I would attribute to, Thomas Verbruggen, so I want to give them some source credit. In the book, I'm going to upload the image that I just downloaded here, and I'm going to add some information to that image. First, I'm going to add, at the very top, I'm going to add a caption. Here's a lovely green cacti. I also want to add some alt text to make sure that users with visual disabilities or that are using different types of browsers that don't display images can understand what this image is. So green cacti and gray sky is my alt text. And down below, there's now this attributions field. This is really helpful if I'm using someone else's image or media resource and I want to properly attribute it. In this case, I do. I know the source URL. It was, not that, it was this source URL. I know the author, Thomas Verbruggen, and I know the author's URL because it linked to it from that website, so I'll just use their Unsplash page as their URL. And I also know the license. In this case, the license was CC BY. So I could choose the license that Thomas chose to attribute the image under. And I could also say the person who adapted, if I had made some edits to this, I didn't, but let's pretend like I edited the image, made the colors pop and cropped it. I could say Steele Wagstaff and my URL, whatever I want it to do. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say when you click this image, I want you to display the media file, which is cool. And I want it to be this size. I just want it to be a thumbnail when I put it into my chapter. So I've entered a tiny little lovely green cacti image. I'm going to save this. And now I want to go into my theme settings and do a couple of things. In the theme options, the first thing I want to do under web options is I want to show linked images in a lightbox. And I also want to, global options, display attributions at the end of a chapter. This means that if I have things in my chapter that have attributions, it will list them at the bottom of the chapter automatically. So that metadata I just entered would render and be visible for people who visit my chapter. So I've saved both of those settings. And now I'm going to go and see my cactus image in its full glory. So here you have this lovely green cacti, and at the bottom of the chapter, you'll notice this media attributions has been inserted, a link to the image, the author, and who adapted it, along with license information, and a full attribution to what the license is. If I were to click on the image, it will load in a really nice, what is it called? Lightbox, thanks, that's the word. And I can escape out of it. And if you were to look under the hood, I guess I'll display it for this one. I'm getting a little bit in the weeds. But here, this media element has been placed inside of a figure element. This is the proper HTML for figures. And the caption is now wrapped in a fig caption element. So that's good semantic markup for images that have been inserted via that WordPress insertion tool. We think that's just cleaning up the ecosystem and making our text more readable and better for web output. The other thing that we want to note is when you clone a book that has media with attributions, now that additional metadata will be cloned with the images. So metadata, including attributions, will be included in the clone. So we won't show that, but I did want to mention that. Speaking of clones, I'm going to hand it back. I'm not saying you're a clone, but I'm going to hand it back to Taylor for the last part of the demo.
Right, so we've got a couple more things to show you that have to do with cloning. I'll go ahead and share my desktop again. Okay. So I'm going to go here to the top of the page, go to clone a book. And you'll see that after our last release, we've got a new section here on the clone page called target book title. So today I'm going to clone the Rebus Communities, a guide to making open textbook with students.
Edited by our wonderful colleague, Liz Mays.
Yeah.
Well done, Liz.
So I'll choose my URL as per normal, and then I can actually choose the own title, or a title that's not the same as the original while doing this cloning process. So maybe I want to make it OER in the classroom. And so this change, what it really does is just simplify the cloning process. So before, you could still change that title, but you would have to clone the book, go back into your book information for that new book, and change it, and then it would take effect. So this will automatically translate into all of those of your export formats in the web book. I'll go ahead and click clone it and wait for this book to clone.
A really common use case for this I would add would be, let's say you're adapting, like say an OpenStax book, and then you wanted to personalize it or make it regionally appropriate. There's a bunch of work that's been done at BC Campus, for example, to make like a Canadian edition of some existing open book. So that would be an example of a way that at the time of cloning, you could add that information to the book title. So it's a personalized or an adapted edition, and you've just done it at the time of cloning.
Come on, keep going still. You have to fill up this time.
I thought I timed it perfectly. Come on.
Oh, there we go. Okay, so I'll go over to our clone book, OER in the classroom, and show you the last thing that we want to demonstrate today, which is the source comparison tool. This is something that we added a couple months ago, but we haven't been able to demonstrate in a capacity like this. So in order for us to turn that on, we'll go to our theme options and then go to the webhook. So what the source comparison tool does is allows you to put on the webbook an option for any user to compare the current version of the book on your network to the current version of wherever the source book is. So I'll go ahead and enable source comparison under web options and through appearance and theme options. I'll wait for that to save my changes. And then I'm going to go in and make a change. So I'll go into the introduction. And I just really don't like this first paragraph. So I'm going to delete it. And save my changes. Then we'll go look at our new front matter page in this cloned book. The source comparison tool only appears as a theme option on books that have been cloned. And you'll see that there's a button down here that says show comparison with original. I can click this, and then you can automatically see the differences between the Rebus Communities version and the version that I have on my network and the deletion that I've made. So you don't have to enable source comparison on any cloned book, but that is an option for you to do.
You'll notice that what we're seeing right now is the HTML output there. That is, so you're seeing HTML tags. It's not the easiest thing to read unless you're somewhat familiar with HTML, but it is helpful because you can see if tags and other things have been changed as well.
And some things are automatically going to get changed. So like the image tags and stuff, when they get cloned over, some of that will be different.
And URLs for the book, you know, the source and so that's what we're seeing down below. If you were to scroll down, you see that the URL.
And then we can
yeah.
collapse that. Okay, so that is what we wanted to demonstrate today.
So Taylor, thank you. You're the best. We want to open up, I guess, to everybody else. Thank you for coming. And what are your questions? Anything anybody saw or wanted to ask about? Feel free to put it in the chat, or if you'd like to unmute yourself, I'll make that possible and you can speak up and do that. I think I'll make that possible. Hold on. Yeah.
I think it's already possible still.
Okay.
I'll probably ask a question while I'm here.
You proved the point. Thanks, Jim.
Is Jim. So I saved a few questions for the end. I'll just ask one at a time though, and then I'll stop if someone else has a question in between or something. I don't want to hog all the time. First one was about the setting up parts and chapters, like changing the names on those. I was curious if there's any way to set up part and chapter default names for like existing and or new titles created using like McLuhan theme, for example. I want all McLuhan theme books to have, you know, to not say part and title, I wanted to say, or part and chapter, I wanted to say, you know, page.
Yeah, I understand the question. So the answer right now is no, but that's a really interesting idea. I think it could theoretically be possible. And I think probably the best way to approach that would be if you're willing to write up an ideas issue for GitHub describing it, we can take it to the dev team. I could imagine that that might be something that a network manager could set up as like network defaults, or maybe even theme defaults if you described it. I don't think it's theoretically possible, but we don't support it now.
Cool, thanks.
Did you have another question?
I do, I was just giving space for others. Second question, the code. Can I style the code like when I do the code, you know, tag? Am I able to add, you know, a background color to that?
Yeah, definitely. So what that's doing right by default is using the code element, which is an HTML element. In your CSS, you can write a rule that just targets the code selector. Okay. And you could also apply classes if you wanted to. There's not a button that lets you in. You go in the HTML, apply class, and do many different code styles if you wanted. But yes, it's stylable via HTML for sure.
Cool.
I'm sorry, via CSS, I meant to say.
Yeah, got it.
Next question. Keep going, Jim. You're on a roll.
The lightbox. I've never used that. I like the concept of it. I don't know if I'm too keen on it rendering full screen like that, though. So is Is that just the nature of the plugin, or
That's
can
the
I just
nature.
render?
That's the nature of the lightbox. You don't have to have the lightbox. So if the lightbox were off and you click the image, it would just open up the media thing. Not in a lightbox. It would just be whatever the browser renders, which may or may not be full screen.
Okay, I was imagining some sort of like pop-up where it's an enlarged image, it's not quite a full screen one, but that's okay. Doesn't.
I think we actually have some additional documentation on Lightbox, which I can post in this chat, but there are a couple different options you can do with Lightbox, I believe.
Okay,